Welcome to Revoicing the Future, a Women of NAMM podcast, presented by AKG. Just as one revoices a chord, Revoicing the Future creates a completely new perspective on the invaluable notes that make up the whole. It will uplift women's voices in the music products industry, which have earned their time to be the root of the chord. Once a month, you can catch productive and valuable conversations with women working in manufacturing, retail, the nonprofit sector, music education, touring, and overall women who inspire us. Together, we can help shape the future of our industry, one interval at a time. This podcast is co-produced and edited by Natalie Morrison, Stephanie Lamond, and Julia Olsen. What's up, everyone? Welcome back to Revoicing the Future.
Hey.
Happy December. Hi, Steph.
Hi.
We're at the end of 2025.
It's wild. I don't understand how. I don't.
I know. And we have a little Christmas gift for you. I don't know if it's a Christmas gift or holiday gift, whatever. We have a really meaty, juicy, just beautiful conversation this month. And it's a long one, but it's the holidays and
Sink
why
your
not?
teeth into it. Curl up in front of a fire, pull up a blanket, drive long distances when you're flying home or driving to, wherever you might be going.
But before
It's
that,
worth it,
and
we promise.
Steph gives a little intro into who our episode is, if you can't already tell by the title. We just wanted to highlight the fact that the NAMM show is next month. And, woohoo. And Revoicing the Future is speaking at the Idea Center. And we already kind of hinted this and whatnot. But our session title is The Future of Leadership, Next Generation Strategies and Insights. And it's Thursday at 3 p.m. in the Idea Center. And then don't forget, also, Women of NAMM has all of the events happening as well. So be sure to check the schedule. We have our annual happy hour reception, which is happening Friday evening for the first time ever. If you're interested, there is the Wednesday of the week of the NAMM show. There is a whole Leadership Amplified track for women hosted by Katie Darrell. So if you're interested in a leadership workshop, please take a look at that as well. Everything is on the NAMM website. And if you're attending the show for the very first time, there is the Women of NAMM First Time Meetup, always Thursday at 10 a.m. So be sure to follow along, and we can't wait to see you all there. Yeah. And with that, Steph, who are we talking to today?
Oh, yes. Okay, so we were talking to a dear friend, mentor, on music industry auntie. I don't know, big sis energy for me. I love her so much. This is Michelle Rose. She is a creative guru. It's probably the best way to put it. She is a creative community builder in all senses. And I don't think I'll say too much more because she explains it perfectly well.
We really talk about AI and how she's really reimagined what that looks like in her life and her career, and how she's trying to demystify that for other creators. And I think that is really powerful. And we've had some requests about, what about AI? Like, how do we talk about AI? And we thought that she would be the perfect person to kind of tackle that conversation.
And I feel she was. Like, what a model.
My God.
That. And then it's more about the psychology than the tool, y'all. I think that's the moral of this, but can't wait for you. Listen, let us know what you think.
Yes.
Maybe try a thing.
From all of us at Revoicing the Future, happy holidays, happy new year, and we can't wait to see you next month in January. Hi, Michelle. Welcome to Revoicing the Future. We're so excited to have you on the podcast.
I'm so excited to be here. Thank you for inviting me. Such an honor.
So you call yourself a creative guru, and you've hosted a slew of podcasts. You write your own Substack blog, and now you're heavily involved in the education of AI in our daily lives. This is my little summary of you thus far. And you've touched many professional worlds through this journey. So can you start by telling us your career story and what has led you to where you are, and how does that work intersect with the music industry?
When I was preparing for this, you see that and you go, how old am I? Where do I start? The first thing is thinking about the fact that it's nonlinear. Stephanie and I have talked about in prior conversations and podcasts. It's been completely nonlinear in terms of what is prescribed for all of us that we think we're supposed to do and what everybody tells us to do. And so I'm going to interweave music into that because I'm not working directly in the music industry like a lot of people that actually you talk to people that cross over all the time. Music has been in my life my entire life. My father was a rock musician as his side job. He was a draftsman, which my mother was as well. They were both very into music. They both played music. So there was always music playing. It was Beatles, Jimi Hendrix, Doors, any of that stuff. So I was a 70s baby. So I just grew up with all of that. I grew up with stereos, radio, bands playing in the living room. And by the time I was 10, I had a record collection of my own. Back then, my dad, to play at school functions and bar mitzvahs and different things like that, he would have to learn the popular music of the time. So we would go to the record store and we would buy 45s of the current top songs. And he would take them home, listen to them on the stereo, learn the song, and then hand them to me when he was done. And so things like, My Sharona and, Hotel California and stuff like that. So I ended up with a big stack of 45s and LPs and all this stuff by the time I was 10. 1981, when I was 11, tells you how old I am now, MTV hit, and I was growing up in California in the Bay Area. So music was a big part of my life. I was really heavily into fashion. I really got into making my own clothes at a really young age. And I started to also hit, because of MTV, I started to hit the alternative music scene, punk rock, new wave, any of those odd things that ended up on MTV and then grew beyond that. And because of that, I started making a ton of my own clothes, buying vintage. So that really led me into I was always drawing. I was an artist, so I was always drawing fashion. I was drawing women's faces. I was drawing punk rock posters for shows. And I ended up with a lot of friends in bands in the 80s, usually guys, boyfriends, a lot of drummers. I dated a lot of drummers, it seems like. So by the time I was a teenager, I was always like schlepping around the drum kit. And, it was really part of that whole alternative scene by then, all through the 80s. Anything you bring up around that, whether it's hair metal, punk rock, new wave, and then just starting to go to a lot of shows. And so that's where the music really hit. And then I left home early because my parents moved up north in Northern California. Actually, what's also a part of the music scene story, I know this is all kind of disjointed. This is my nonlinear path.
I love it.
But when I was 10, and my dad, I said he played a lot of gigs and stuff in the Bay Area. He got hit by a drunk driver coming home from a band gig. So he was driving home after a show and got hit pretty badly and almost died. And so that created a situation where he stopped playing, and we used the money to buy land up north in California and basically homestead, build a house, live up in the hills away from the Bay Area. And because of that, that's where I went to high school, and there was a big alternative music scene there from all of these kids that had pulled out of LA and the Bay Area from parents who did that. And I wanted to be in a city somewhere. I followed a boyfriend up to Portland in 1990. So I was barely 20 years old. And that's when I started trying to make it on my own and figure my life out without going right into college. And so I didn't do that path. I took classes and stuff, but instead I just got into a lot of trouble. And because of that, I had to find some way out of the trouble. And I ended up in Portland at a time when grunge was just taking off. And another thing that was taking off was a little company called Starbucks. So I got hired to help open the third and fourth stores in the Portland market. It was Starbucks' third market. And I was 20 years old, and they were just hiring a bunch of kids like us, paying us really well. We were all a bunch of tattooed, pierced up 90s kids. And I ended up being a trainer for Starbucks and being able to go up to Seattle a ton and meet Howard Schultz and walk around Seattle with him and learn about coffee and spend a lot of time up in the Pacific Northwest when the whole grunge scene was happening. And so for me, I didn't really have a direction. I had been making my own clothes. I had been drawing. I had been taking some design classes, some drafting classes, some pattern making classes, some anthropology, but I was floating. And I was hanging out with bands and going to shows and just working at a cool coffee shop. And it wasn't really going anywhere, but it was fun for a while until I got myself into plenty of trouble, and I had to finally, I started training martial arts. It was like the weirdest thing to start doing that, because that was also something that was going on in the Pacific Northwest at that time. Was grunge, was coffee, was bike commuting. and was the Riot Girl scene. And the Riot Girl scene was totally based in self-defense, women's empowerment, and martial arts. And so the school I started training at was a female-owned school, and it was full of all kinds of women that were really part of that Riot Girl scene. So I found myself in that type of a music scene again, but a little bit on the healthier side. Instead of all the guys and the drugs and the partying and stuff, it was much more of a political movement. And so I got involved in that and started working at the studio and started training. And that's what I did throughout my 20s, when most people are in college, starting their jobs and their careers. And I was just figuring out how to live on my own and how to exist, take care of myself, and have some sort of path. And eventually what I had to do through that was a really transformative time. That's the thing that eventually led me into design. Because eventually through that whole period, about 10 years there of working to get my black belt, I eventually realized I needed to go back to college. I needed to figure out a direction. I realized I needed a degree. I didn't have one, and that everyone around me, I was training with a lot of amazing women who had come from Lewis and Clark College and Reed College in the Portland area. We had programs there that were feeding into the school. And I realized that they were getting these jobs that I wasn't getting, right? And I just kind of was stuck in this loop. So I eventually figured out that I needed to figure out how to get myself to school.
Yeah.
And I did. I found a private fashion school that is now defunct, but it was on its way out. But I went right in and got my financial aid. I signed up for classes. I think I was 28 years old by then. And I just took out a bunch of loans, got a few grants, and started racking up debt and put myself through school. I put myself through fashion school, business school, and then eventually I managed to land my first design job. And I got really lucky that I landed it at Columbia Sportswear and met my mentor there. And I could say a lot more about that, but at that point, I think I should just stop and say that. Because it was a circuitous path of, trying to find your way. And I still sift through it a lot. And I talk with people about it a lot. There's a lot in there that a lot of us Gen Xers, the economy wasn't great. Jobs weren't great. A lot of people were going to college, but weren't finding a lot of work afterwards. There was a lot of us who hadn't gone to college and were just kind of getting stuck. So it was very much like Reality Bites, that movie. It really felt like that. So everyone's living in shared houses. Everyone has junker cars or no cars, or they're riding bikes, crappy old furniture. There's no IKEA anywhere. That wasn't even around yet. So, and everyone's just kind of cobbling together an existence and trying to build whatever they can. And Portland was a pretty fun place to do that. It was also pretty wet and cold. And so, there's a lot of thrift store shopping, but that's what led to it. That eventually you've got to figure something out and you've got to create a career and find your way through. And so it was a long path for me to even just get to my first launch of a career. And by the time I started at Columbia Sportswear, doing outerwear design, performance design, I think I was 32. So my path took a while. Yeah.
But I think what is really cool about this story in particular, and your story, is that your anchor was music and creativity, right? Everything that you touched, that you listed, was all creative based. And also the Riot Girl scene too. That's really cool to hear that kind of served as an anchor and an inspiration piece for you to
like
move.
An incubator. Almost.
Yeah, like
Absolutely.
push you through to putting yourself through school and then ultimately getting your job at Columbia.
And to your point of the Riot Girl thing, I'd like to hear, what you guys are picking up on that is because those of us from the 80s that were coming out of these punk metal scenes, these big music scenes, it was a really difficult time. We had a lot of angry guys in our generation, a lot of absent fathers, a lot of broken families, and this was the result. A lot of people who were lost and needed to figure it out. Gen X, we had to grow ourselves up all the way through. And so the Riot Girl thing for me, I actually moved to Portland with a drummer boyfriend who was an alcoholic already and abusive. And so I had already gone through an abusive relationship, gotten out of it, and ended up training martial arts, partly because of that. But I also wanted to do martial arts before that. But I ended up meeting all kinds of women just like me who had been through it too. And I heard so much of it that I was like, this is this is a huge problem for our generation. So the Riot Girl thing came out of that. And it was this empowerment of women becoming stronger and being able to speak up. And a lot of people don't know that, that's what that came out of, because even in those punk and metal scenes, there was so much abuse. There was so much drug abuse. A lot of my old friends where I moved out of California became heroin addicts after I left. So there was a ton of that going on. And I feel like I escaped it, barely. Like I narrowly escaped all these problems. And martial arts was my way through healing. And it got me back to college. It got me focused, and it got me a degree in design and business. And it got me a top job at the top outdoor company with the most amazing mentor. It was a long path, but boy, man, when I landed, I really landed.
Yeah. You're not the first person also who's talked about the Riot Girl movement. Like
really?
we've had a couple of other guests like Sherry Yevon and Mindy Monk, who started Tom Tom magazine. Like that was her inspiration and everything. So
yeah, it was really key, but it was a movement that we moved through. As you think about the 90s and what happened there, you've got alternative music just punching through with Nirvana coming through. Most of us were listening to that music long before Nirvana got popular. It just punched through and we went, oh my God, now everybody knows about our music and our scene. Mm-hmm. So that happens. Kurt Cobain dies. We have Napster hitting. We have everything getting really big and then exploding. And so we really witnessed kind of the absolute exploitation of our Gen X culture and the death of it in a very short amount of time. And the 90s really signifies that for me. So by the time we got out of that and I started designing in the early 2000s, that was a door that I chose to shut and keep closed for a really long time. And so for about 20 years, I kind of ignored music for after that. And then I had to come back to it later on. So...
Okay, so quick summary of those 20 years sans music, but then what brought you back? And then I guess, where are we now?
Well, yeah, what I ended up doing in that, just a kind of a quick gloss over those 20 years.
Yeah.
I ended up with an amazing mentor. We lived in Portland, and there was the kind of the top three, Nike, Adidas, and Columbia Sportswear were the top brands there. And everybody I knew worked at one of them. I turned down an unpaid internship at Adidas, took a paid internship at Columbia, ended up having a really amazing start to my career, got to design globally. I got to start traveling the world and doing all of these things I always wanted to do. It was like my life took off. So I plunged myself into travel, other types of music, more world music, classical music, jazz, electronic, other forms, anything that didn't have a guitar. For the longest time, I was like, I don't want to hear another guitar as long as I live, I really thought that for a while. And then eventually I got to a point where I got headhunted out by the North Face. And that was kind of my claim to fame, is ending up at the top outdoor company in the top design position, traveling the world, making a great salary, and just having a lot more exposure. It was a really difficult job. And I was there between those companies. It was almost 15 years of that piece until I decided to become a mom. Like that's the other piece of the story of being a woman, is I didn't become a mom until I was 41. And that ended up being the thing to really derail my career, unfortunately. And so I have that story as well. And in that process of becoming a mom and falling in love with this beautiful little boy and just having everything shift and having my career start to feel like it's falling apart, somehow I started to come back to music. It was like something in me just twisted. And I realized, I remember having this moment, it was probably 2015, 2016, my son was like 4 or 5, that just something shifted in me. And I started watching YouTube. I had never really been watching YouTube. We had videos on it from our conference that we've been doing. And I started to notice that there was lots of music on YouTube. And there was all this work, all these bands that I'd loved for years, I hadn't paid attention to for years. I started to see what they'd been doing. Like suddenly I just opened up the door and the last 20 years came flooding at me. And suddenly I was like, oh my God, they're still around. Oh my God, they're doing that. Oh my God, there's videos of all this stuff. Because when I shut the door on music, There was no YouTube. There was barely the internet. We didn't have any way to look at all of this. And so I never really looked at that. I'd been paying attention to fashion, design, the international scene, and not really rock and roll and any of that stuff. And when I opened that door back up, it was just like, I likened it to an old Victorian house where you've shut off a room and you've put the sheets all over the furniture. And somehow I opened that door up and I started pulling all the sheets off. And after that, I realized, oh my God, there's a huge wall full of doors that I didn't know were there. And I started walking through all of them. And that shifted everything for me in both good and difficult ways. And bringing music back in, I realized I had basically shut off a huge part of myself that was missing. It's interesting because during my time at Columbia Sportswear, is my early part of my job, I felt like I was really opening up, like all this stuff was blossoming in me. And at the North Face, at the second half of my career, when I had this much bigger job, I started to feel like I was closing off. It's almost like I started to realize, like, I can't be me here. There's something missing. I'm not all here. There are pieces that are not here. I was not able to share myself with the people that I was working with. And over time, I realized, like, a big piece of it was the music. I just wasn't integrated. I was completely fractured. And it's not unusual because if I talked about my whole childhood and where I came from, that's fractured too. And that's what I had to kind of work on in my 20s, in the 90s, was that healing that I went through in training martial arts that a lot of the women from the Riot Girl scene were going through as well. So to me, coming back to the music was a reintegration of something that was so core to me, like the core memory, right? Like that feeling of like, I've got these set of core memories and things that were so important to me, and they've been locked away in this box, but they're still there. And so I made a decision at one point to pull them out and integrate them back into my life. And since probably 2016, 17, I've just been flooding as much as I could back in, reopening it. The pathway of like using social media to start posting Instagram posts about music that you liked or listened to, it felt like, God, should I admit that I liked this? Like, should I tell people that I listened to this, But then I started going to shows again. Literally, I used to always go to punk shows and metal shows. I hadn't done that in so long. And I thought, God, what's the scene like? I mean, I live in the Bay Area now, right? Like, what would it be like if I walked into, what bands are out there? What shows are playing? And I somehow figured it out. And I started walking into shows by myself and started listening to bands and got back into it. And now my whole life has changed again since then. So it's been, 8 years since I've done that. So yeah, I could talk about that forever. But yeah, these are the bookends we've talked about, is, how music started in my life and where it is now. And there's this whole chunk of time in the middle, which is interesting because it's that chunk in the middle of almost my whole relationship with my ex-husband, who I met in 1995. We both trained martial arts. And he was a drummer too. But the whole 20-some years we were together, he didn't drum. He didn't play music. So this was interesting. He had a big record collection, and we listened to music, his music and that. But he was part of the DC music scene as a drummer. He tried out for Fugazi back when they were first forming after Minor Threat ended up. And so he was a punk drummer and did some touring and recording. And then he put it away and did his thing. And he's come back to it now too. And he's playing in bands again. So it's kind of this bizarre time that I started to wonder how many other people from my generation did that in an effort to grow up and have a normal life, only to come back to it and go, oh my God, I always wanted to keep doing this. So this is an interesting thing with Gen X. I don't know how it is for the other generations, for you guys, but for us, it was like we grew up so heavily with music as an influence and this culture of music that I think a lot of us felt like we had to shut the door on it and put it away to have a life, only to realize that that life that we had to go give that up for wasn't worth giving it up for.
Yeah.
Not at all. Not at all. And so so many people have been coming back to it. I got to the point where I started taking guitar lessons. I started taking voice lessons, and I started getting myself on stage. And that was something I never did when I was younger. That's music in my life,
And so talk to me too. Like, I'm hearing so much exemplified what we already know, right? But also you think of all these things and life chapters and stages in such a collective, right? Like you're tracking your generation with you, your people with you, your community with you this whole time. And I think so much of your work has become creative community building.
Yes.
I think with that, again, I think it really does define your work now. And I guess introduce us to structure and like how this started, because as just the underlying that community has driven everything.
Yeah. And your connection to like Karen Dunn and the pro audio scene.
Yeah. And that's great insight, Stephanie, that you have in saying that. But we've also had these conversations about some of this too. And so, and getting into that, one of the biggest things in starting Structure Society was started when I became a mom at the North Face, and that I struggled for the first couple of years there when he had some seizures and some problems when he was an infant, and I was not supported, which is unfortunately another story that just replicates across industries for women. So it's nothing unusual at all, but it sucked. But in that process, I also was seeing as a design leader, because I was leading creative teams, and I really understood the artist, right? I really understood musicians. I understood artists, painters, creatives. We all create from a deep sense of usually trauma and something difficult, right? And you're studying this in psychology. And I knew that. And I've always been incredibly empathetic to other artists and people who needed support. So I wanted to create something that wasn't there. I was seeing a lot of designers across the outdoor industry who weren't having any support. We didn't have a place to gather. We had trade shows, not like NAMM. We had Outdoor Retailer, which was not actually that supportive of designers. We had to kind of hide ourselves to walk around. There were not events for us there. There's still a really odd lack of support for the designers in the industry. And I wanted to create something for that. And so my ex-husband, Sam, and he came from the digital space, and he said, well, I'm always going to conferences. I've gone with him to the conferences. He said, don't you have something like that? And I said, no, we just have the trade shows. And he goes, well, what if we created something? And so we did. He and I got coaching from the web design world, and we started Structure Event, which was the first design conference for the outdoor industry, for sport and outdoor, and all the designers across, from Nike to the North Face, and just word of mouth. And it was really successful. We ran it up in Portland for about 5 years, and it was really focused on graphic designers, apparel designers, gear designers, industrial. So that was where we started to build community. And it was always focused on the creative, always focused on the artist. That was my biggest thing. And people always tried to turn it into something else, more PR for them and more stuff for the merchants and stuff. And no, this is for the designers. You have your thing. We need our thing. And I ran that for 5 years until it became difficult to financially support it. And also with the last Trump administration, the first one, it actually made a lot of our sponsors pull out of fear of the economy. And so that actually was what helped shut it down. Yeah. And then what happened after that, my ex-husband and I, after many years, we had a very healthy split in our relationship. And I took Structure with me and decided to kind of hold it. And then I shut it down. And then I tried to run a brand with another woman who had left the North Face as well, another mom. And we did a Kickstarter and started our own bag brand. And I kept getting people asking me about Structure. Okay, that's great with this great new brand you're doing, but what about Structure? When are you going to do Structure again? And my partner was like, oh my God, no one's going to ever leave you alone with this. And so at some point I made a decision. And I think that was during COVID, first year of COVID. This is going to overlap with Karen in here because
I think this is probably when we connected then too.
Yes, because just before COVID hit, that bag brand we did a pop-up shop here in the Bay Area. And it was at a woman's store, a friend in Walnut Creek. And that's when Karen Dunn was there. She walked up to me. I mean, she's like glasses on, all in black, dark hair. And so I'm looking the same way, right? So she finds the other person who's all in black with glasses. And she just walks right over to me and we start talking. And she was asking about the bags and all the blah, blah, blah. But then we started talking about what we did. And I said, well, I used to run this event. And I told her about it. And she goes, yeah, I run events too. I run this show called NAMM. And I was like, well, I know NAMM. I'm supposed to go to NAMM this year. My partner is a musician because the man I was dating and am dating now is a touring recording musician and composer. And so I was like, oh, you just run this little thing called NAMM. But she said, I'd really love to hear more about what you're doing with Structure. And if you do, I was thinking about relaunching it in some way. She said, let me know if I can help in any way. And so I think we had lunch in like December or something of 2019. And then COVID hit. And so then didn't go to NAMM. It shut down right after. And so for some reason, I think we ended up not going to NAMM. And then the shutdown happened. And then she invited me to her group that summer, right? But somewhere in there, we reconnected. And she said, well, I'm doing these online experiments. I said, well, people are starting to reach out to me and say, wow, we really need our community to get together. My conferences were 3 days long with lots, like 20 plus speakers. And I said, well, I want to do something online. And so I pulled Karen in and we started doing Structure Series, which was an online recorded way to have a creative conversation, but also have an audience that could connect and communicate and network. And I needed Karen's help in figuring that out because we were all just figuring out Zoom for the first time. And the other piece of that was I had told Karen, I want to bring more music into Structure because that was something as I was bringing music back into my life, I knew that if I wanted to come back to this community and this event, that I wanted it to include the things that I loved. I needed to come back to it in my own way. I couldn't do it the way I was doing it before. So I worked with a colleague of mine on some branding and worked on a way of bringing music in along with the design and said, does this make sense? And so we wrote a whole brand proposal of what that could look like. And Karen was part of bringing that, integrating that in. And so then what I started doing was these dual interviews of somebody from the design industry and somebody from the music industry and having a similar conversation, like a conversation about mental health in the creative industries, and started mixing those two and seeing what does this look like. And that's how that started to roll. And we ran that for I think 10 episodes for that year. And that was really a great experiment for me to keep going. But that was the piece where I knew, like, I want to bring music in because it's so important to me. And I need to experiment with it more myself. But I felt like I was such a professional designer that I knew that industry inside and out. I know people in every brand out there, or know somebody who knows somebody, or we've all moved around. But when it came to the music industry, I was like, I don't know, I'm just a longtime fan, a lifelong fan. But I know so much music. So I just went, well, I don't have to be the expert in it to have the conversations about the creative process. Because to me, it was really the creative process between what designers do and what musicians do is the same damn thing. The way that we have to, the experience of having to birth a song, a design, an idea out of nothing is the same process. And I understood that. It was something I really understood in working with the athletes in the outdoor industry. I don't have to be a mountain climber, but we could sit there and talk about the same things when it came to martial arts, and for me, martial arts and them for climbing, there were a lot of similarities. And to realize that we can connect as creative human beings.
Yeah. What I love so much too is that your story exemplifies to me how I feel like we that are very firmly on the business side of music legitimize ourselves by being paid for what we do. And I think I'm being struck by how wild it is that it's not a first thought to include everyone in the music community, which includes fans of the music that are at the shows, everybody on the other side of the stage, as viable members of that music community.
Yes.
And when it really is absolutely the whole symbiotic ecosystem, like all of it is the loop of it. And I love how much you've lived that as being someone absolutely in the music community on that side of it. It's amazing.
Yeah. And also being with a partner who actually is the music creator There are more than people realize how many artistic and amazing, talented musicians out there who are eking out an existence without a corporate job.
Yes.
And trying desperately not to do construction work or all the side work they have to do to support, but they, trying to survive off of writing, performing, recording.
Yep.
And so I have really strong opinions about the streaming services. I love watching Rick Beato and Mary Spender goes constantly about the challenges of that being an artist in the music industry. And so that's also at the center of what I like to discuss is the business side of it, because you guys have been on the business side of it, but the artists have a really hard time crossing over to the business side.
Yeah.
And they need that education. I needed that.
Yeah. And sometimes it takes someone that has come up in a different industry to be able to see what's broken about ours, because we're drinking the water every day, right? Things that feel systemic. Sometimes you need a perspective that's like, that's not how that should go. Maybe we retool that a smidge.
NAMM has been a really interesting experience for me to go to, while also watching in the outdoor and sport industry, we're watching our trade shows fall apart. They've already fallen apart now, but the last 5 years or plus, they've been falling apart. We've become a very fractured industry, and a lot of people are looking for work, and all kinds of crazy things have happened. And I keep holding up NAMM is a really interesting example in the music industry for cohesion in this industry, which actually I don't really work in the outdoor industry. I work in the creative, bigger sphere. But to me, it's interesting that NAMM has been running for so long, and it's such an inclusive seeming community. It's very energetic and exciting. But then to remember that there are people left out in that. There are all kinds of, here in the Bay Area, there's a whole underground music scene of people who never go to something like NAMM. Why would they, right? But they should, they could, but they can't afford it or they don't know. There's a whole level of me coming from underground music my whole life. I would say there's a whole world down there that fuels all this that people don't even know about, That's really strong when people say, oh, LPs are back. I'm like, well, everybody around here has been selling vinyl. They never stopped. The amount of vinyl that comes out of the Bay Area, these etched amazing, or, just the underground metal scene, these etched records and these huge gatefolds of beautiful, they never stopped making them. They had to find the ways to create them when vinyl was going down. But anyway, there's a whole underground world of any artistic creative field that is going on that you have to go find. You have to seek it out. But that's fueling the life of music.
Well, we're going to do a huge turn of topic. If you're ready.
I'll follow you anywhere.
One of the things that we were really excited to talk to you about, and that we've heard interest from our listeners and wanting to dive more into, is AI. And you and I spoke on the phone a few months ago about the work that you're doing to educate and learn from others on how to demystify the usage of AI, and especially for creatives not to fear what AI can do in the space. So when did you know that this was an area that you wanted to tap into, and how did you really get involved with that?
I want to point out too, before you jump in, Michelle, that was such a perfect segue too for the mindset of you talking about like the underground world. I feel like there's a spirit of just getting in there and rolling up your sleeves of all these communities that I imagine might have made you able to embrace something like this and want to dive in.
Yeah. Ooh.
Yes. Because it's also, you just dig in, you just get dirty, right? Like you're like, I don't know, I just got to figure this out. A colleague of mine who led me into it had said that Gen X is so perfectly primed for this because we have one foot in the old world and one foot in the new with the digital. Like we did grow up with video games, and, Pong and Atari and all that stuff. And we love that stuff. We love the future. We love sci-fi. We're Star Wars kids. And I think that has a bit to do with it. Whenever the future comes around, I'm like, yes, let's just dive into the future. I love it. My ex-husband has always been very digitally focused. And when I took over Structure, I had to learn how to build the website and manage the YouTube channel and build all these new platforms and run the Instagram. I had to learn all that myself. He did that. And so that made me more savvy about that type of thing. But when the AI thing came out, I started to see, well, when you're independent and everybody's looking for consulting work and figuring out their next role here, you're thinking, oh God, I don't want to be irrelevant. Here are these new platforms. What are ways that we can do some of this design work and creative work without having to do all that crap that we don't like to do anymore? So I started to dig into that, but it wasn't really leading anywhere. So last year I played with Suno. I created some music tracks and I created some images on Midjourney and I made little music bars and stuff like that, stuck it on my YouTube channel. But I was also saying, like, I wanted to show this is an artist working with AI. It's not just AI creating it, but I wanted to also disclose that I was working with AI on these things. And then when the visual, more of the, because I hated all the Midjourney art. I mean, everybody goes, oh, it's so amazing. It's like, well, it's, you could change the style, but the style sucks. It's like really bad, airbrush street art that we used to find. We're like, this is so tacky. It's, it's practically a velvet painting here. It's awful. It's awful art. I mean, I wish people would kind of get over it, and I think they will. And then what I started wanting to do is take my own sketches and put them in there to see what can I do with them to enhance those. And it did some really weird shit, let me tell you. Got some really strange things.
It's like the SNL skit.
Oh, with Glenn Powell? Is that?
Well, yeah, with Glenn Powell, and they were in the nursing home visiting their grandmother, and they had this app where they were making fun of the AI apps that turn photos into life. So they were trying to turn photos from their grandmother's childhood into life, but then like playing on the joke that totally AI just like botches it all, and it was just completely like ruining her day.
Yes. That's what made so many of us just go, oh, this sucks. Okay, well, let's just let this figure itself out until it gets better. Then I connected with a colleague of mine named Allison Ross, who's a creative director and brand and artist. And she had been a speaker at Structure and run panels and really been part of my community for years. So somehow we got to talking about AI, actually just a few months ago. But last year she had said that she was determined to dig into AI because she said back in the late 90s, early 2000s, she started working with an agency that, this big e-commerce thing was starting to kick off, right? And the agency's like, we're not going to dig into that. And they didn't do anything with e-commerce, and they missed the boat on everything that was happening with the internet. And she said she felt like she missed all the stuff she should have learned and known in doing that. And it kind of put her behind. And she said, okay, now with AI, I'm diving in. I've got a few months here of downtime between projects. And she kind of sequestered herself away with a colleague and said, I'm going to learn everything I can about AI. And she said she'd go off into the room and start playing with things and disappear for a few hours and then come out to her colleague and be like, this sucks. I hate it. And complaining about how awful so many of the programs were. And her friend said, well, Allison, why are you using AI to try to do the things that you love doing? You're an artist. Why don't you use it to do the things you don't love doing? And that flipped something in her that went like writing like a statement of work, SOWs, and doing financial plans and doing all of the writing and social media and all of the administrative stuff that takes you forever. And she went in, instead of taking several hours to put together proposals, she could get one together in 30 minutes, and she started to use it as a support work. And I went, yes. And so her saying that really inspired me to want to dig in. And then somewhere in there, it was this summer when I said, I need to start pulling people together because I've been writing on Substack for a while and I've been trying to figure out where Structure needed to go now. And I wanted to get a community together. And I said, I'm just going to start doing a thing every week. Like I started listening to the AI Daily Brief podcast, which is a daily thing with Nathaniel Whittemore, which I really love. I love how he puts it all together. And so every day I was listening and I just was like, I don't even know half the shit he's talking about. Sorry about my language, but that's how it felt. It's just like, oh my God, all this stuff and I just went, well, if I know that if I just listen every day, I'll eventually get it. It'll start to sink in. And so I started listening to that. And I said, I'm going to do a weekly thing where see who shows up and just say, hey, I don't know what any of this is. I'm going to dig in and figure it out. And anybody wants to join me. I said, okay, a $5 donation just to have an energy exchange of something to come in. Because I didn't feel like I had knowledge to give to people. Like I could create a platform for us to meet and talk and share. Because structure's always been about knowledge sharing and community knowledge sharing. So I said, well, all right, I know a little bit here, you know a little bit here, let's all start talking about this. And over time of running that, I've been running it now for over 3 months, every Friday, about 15, 16 groups we've had now. People have been relying a little bit more on me, what I bring to the table. So it's been forcing me every week to go in and work with another platform, work with another platform, work with another one. And then other people start sharing theirs. And then the other piece was that when this all started, Allison created my first GPT for me. She said, I'll create a GPT for you, a thought partner for your writing. And so I gave her 10 of my articles. She plugged that in and she built out my first chat GPT of my own and kind of gave that back to me and then showed me how to use it online. And then she showed me how to build my own. Now I work with chat GPT every day, almost all day long. And I've built several of my own GPTs in a very short amount of time. And what I have found is it's not just great for research, but the interaction that I've been able to train it to have with me. The realization I said to my group last week was, I realized that, a lot of people are using it for therapy and coaching and all kinds of things. And I said, ChatGPT is not coaching me. It's helping me coach myself. And I've done a lot of coaching. I've done a lot of therapy. I've been coaching. I've been on both sides of coaching. So I know how to work with it. But it's really like, it's asking me questions and I'm asking it questions and then I'm talking back to it. And then it's mirroring back to me what I need to hear or see that I may not be able to see myself. And I also got to a point where I'm no longer typing. I mean, all of that's vibe coding, but vibe coding is just basically coding without actual coding. It's just typing or talking with regular language. I talk like this. And so I can sit there and just go, okay, I want to write my blog about this and this and this. And it'll say, okay, what's bringing you to the table to this topic today? Why do you want to talk about this? And what's the tone you want to set? And what do you want your reader to feel? And then I can sit there and have a conversation with it and say, this is what's been going on with me. And this is why I want to talk about this. And this is what I'm seeing. And this is what I'm feeling. and this is, and I can just get as animated and emotional as I want to. And then, it's been trained to work with me. So it comes back and it's like, wow, I really hear the richness in that. It says there's a lot of the same stuff, but at the same time, it's just what I need to hear. Like, okay, let's take that. And how about if we pull that? I'm hearing this and I'm hearing this. And it pulls out the gems because I'm in the weeds, right? When we're creative, we're down here going, I just feel this. I feel this stuff around me and I'm angry about this, or I'm feeling really excited about this. And I see these connections between these things. And we're so emotionally connected to our feelings about things that it can be really difficult to write about them objectively. It can take a long time to pull those notes out. And that is part of writing, is creating that outline. What do I want to say? How do I want to say it? I always have to create some sort of outline. But I usually use ChatGPT now to create the outline, and we form that first, and then we flesh things out together. And I like that process because I'm leading that process. It doesn't write for me, it's writing with me, right? So it pulls out, it's just like you two sitting there. One of you just starts talking about a great idea for a podcast, and the other person says, well, what do you mean about that? That's an interesting point. Pull that out. That's interesting there, because that connects to something you said last week about blah, blah, blah. And when you're working with a GPT like that you're constantly working with, it has memory of working with you before and what you're doing. And so you start to establish that kind of a relationship with it. So in a very short amount of time, in a matter of literally 3 months, this is where I've gotten to. And it has allowed me to write a daily blog and not miss. I've written 53 blogs now since I started. It's allowed me to run all these mind melds, is what I call them. It's a mind meld, a sharing of knowledge, and build all of these slide decks. I've figured out different programs that will take what I just wrote and say, okay, here's my LinkedIn version I'm going to post about it. And here's my Instagram carousel. And I can plug that into a program called Figma. And it just has my slide template and there's my thing. And instead of hours, it takes a few minutes, sometimes seconds. So it's speeding up the process. It's also making it clearer and more concise. It finds the lines, the threads through things. Yeah. So I'm using it right now I decided to come back to Instagram and look at my Instagram profiles and go, what's missing? What's not working for these? And I don't have to plug in all this stuff. All I have to do is say, here's my Instagram account. What do you see? And it just goes and checks it out.
Wow. This is so, like, I'm mind boggled.
Yeah.
You know, like for someone who just like likes to do the things, that thinking process and everything, the idea of bringing that into my life just as my brain spinning with it. It's so fascinating to hear how you've just kind of adapted it. Like you have this like little assistant with you.
Yeah.
But at the same time, I question like, but what about the people who are actually like the therapists in the world who are there to guide you through those things? That's now where my brain is like, okay, what's going on here?
And I'm right with you. You know, for somebody who has done a lot of therapy and done, like I said, coaching on both sides, I am a huge proponent for finding the right person to talk to, that human connection. ChatGPT can't be that. It can be something that can reflect back to you. But when you need human connection and human answers and a human perspective, this is the biggest thing, is people have to understand that it's only pulling into the knowledge base it has access to. And the other piece that I really like to pay attention to is, and I love how Rick Beato talked about this on one of his videos, is that it's not even pulling from all the knowledge in the world, as people like to say, all the human knowledge, because all the human knowledge isn't online. And this is where the underground thing comes in. There is so much knowledge of shared human experience and interviews that have never happened online. Like they're saying, the exchange of playing a guitar with another person and what you're picking up and all the feelings that come around that's not online. And ChatGPT is not going to, any of these bots are not going to pull that up. So there's a lot of things missing there. And people have to get real clear on that, that we are the leaders. We have things that it won't ever have. And that's something I learned from martial arts as well. Is that's what I call, like, my blog is Hunting the Paper Tiger, which is the idea of a paper tiger. It's just all the surface and no substance behind it. And so we are trained as teachers in martial arts to see when what their intent is behind their movement. Are they just being flashy, or is there really something behind there that has substance? And that's also a music thing. Like you can tell when it's just empty, like formulaic, or when there's soul and heart and everything behind it. And that is human energy. And that's life. That's a life force. And that will never come through in a digital form. And so once you're clear on that, you can come back to this and work with it as a tool. And so I don't have a fear of it, because it's a tool helping me. So it's just like a screwdriver or a wrench. I can just do it a little faster now. And I need it because I'm working independently. I don't have the resources to hire a team to do this for me. As a middle-aged woman who basically, like the rest of me, and I just saw a meme of all the women in France who are NERS, like not employed or retired because they can't get hired, like 50-some-year-old women who can't get hired, but they can't retire either. And so one of the biggest reasons I also created this for my community is people are worried, okay, we're going to become obsolete. Well, my age group, especially Gen X women, are being aged out and obsolete without us wanting to be. We have to create our own jobs. We have to create our own resources. And so this is one of the biggest ways of we need to be upfront with this. And so it's helping me. So I'm doing it as a necessity that I have to create these things and I have to create them fast. So that's a big driver.
That's a really interesting perspective and also extremely fascinating. I really kind of want to dive into with this is what's that correlation between the gender norms of women in the workplace with AI, right?
Yeah.
I remember you telling me that most of the people who came to your mind melds were women because of this fear of like, how do I get ahead of this? Because I need to do this for my career to push me forward.
Yeah.
So can we dive into that a little bit more?
Yeah. And I was thinking about that because I will say men have dropped in. And there are a couple of other men that are in there regularly now too. But yeah, there has generally been more women. And some of them, there's older, more boomer age. And these are the women that are like just really gung-ho to keep going and do these great things that they've been doing. And they're excited and they're awesome and really inspirational. The bigger bulk of it is people at that middle age who have been looking for work for a long time after having a very long career, a successful career. And they don't all know that everybody's kind of looking for work and trying to cobble that together because everyone's very private. It's really hard. But in the place that I'm at, people like to talk to me. I'm very open. I create a safe space. So I hear a lot of stories, but I also look for them. I cannot tell you how many things I've read on LinkedIn. People have come to me and told me, people have shared with it, everyone who's lost their job, in their late 40s, early 50s, mid 50s, early 60s, going, I'm not ready to retire. And then I can't retire yet, but I can't get any work. And people who have had really professional, high-level jobs at high-level companies for the last 25, 30 years. It's been more women have had that happen. And some of that can be family, like having kids and having to balance that. There's a lot more women also who are divorced and single than in past history. So there's a lot of us who are supporting ourselves and our children. And I think maybe society, we don't really talk about it, but I think there's this underlying feeling that women usually have a male partner over there who's the breadwinner still. And so women can be easily let go or written off or kind of pushed down the ladder. And that, like I said, is not talked about, but boy, I see it. You can feel it. Like, you'll be okay. Like they don't know that so many, like myself and so many women, were the higher earners. So when we lose our jobs, a lot more people suffer. So women are often still seen as that kind of secondary income, that person at home with the kids, that there'll be a man to support you or something. It's not really even necessarily thought about. I'm seeing a lot of women struggling with that, but I still see men as well. It's just that the women are coming into the AI mind meld going, I'm trying to figure out what it is I need to do to be relevant. And so my big thing has been, you got to build your own thing. You've got to create, because this is something that our generation didn't grow up with like you guys did. We did not grow up putting our lives online on video. We didn't create brands. We didn't tell stories about ourselves. We were taught to stay humble, keep quiet, put your nose down, get to work and stick at a job, get a good job and stay there. And what a lot of people did is they stayed at jobs for 20, 25 years and then found themselves suddenly laid off. How many people have been like, I just hit 29 years at blah, 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 and I just got laid off and I'm, 59 and I don't know what to do now. And that's very common. And so to me, diving into AI is really important. When I talked with my colleague, Allison Ross, about this, we did a podcast actually about this. And she was saying, I think Gen X is really primed in the best place to really learn AI because we have experience, we have leadership, and we do know how to learn tech. And we're not as distant from it as, say, the boomer generation. And so we are really the ones ready to kind of embrace it, but then couple it up with our experience and help lead. And she said the most difficult ones right now are probably the kids who are just getting out of school and trying to find jobs because they were not fully educated in AI in school. And now there's not the jobs that they think they were trained for out there. And we're seeing that happening. The unemployment level, I think, for that age group is something like 16% or something like that. Yeah, it's pretty bad. And I'd love to see some of those people in the Mind Meld. I've invited a few who I'm mentoring as well that haven't shown up yet. So there's a barrier to that because it's just a small handful of people who show up. And the guys that often show up, I can tell they're looking for something a little more techie. That AI experience, like, okay, we're going to sit here and dig in. And we do that, but it's a bit more emotional. It's a bit more about the creative process of, well, how do we feel about AI doing this and taking this work that we need to do? And that's where I want to be with it personally. And that's where I'm going to take it. So
it's making me think so much of, I'm reading The Psychology of Money.
Yeah.
Book by Morgan Housel. And it's because I'm just finally figuring I need to get a handle on this stuff. But it's reminded me of that like finances, where there's so much of it is about the psychology that's behind this thing. So like everything you're talking about, it's how positioned and how resilient and how creative of a thinker are you? And that is who will be able to thrive in an AI-driven world, rather than even just thinking of it like tool by tool. It has to be more about the mindset 10 layers deeper to why you're using it, to then authentically integrate it into your creative process and be like, oh, great. Like I am now purely the creator. I don't like typing is not writing. Like me creating a concept and fleshing it out is the writing. Like there's so many little moving parts to that I think perceiving for the first time with this conversation, that it really is more so about all the psychology of it more so than the techie tool.
And I love that you're studying that and you're bringing that to it, because that is it. I mean, we say, oh, mindset, but what does that mean? And it comes down to, as a creative, getting to know yourself. So this is something that I've been working on, and this comes also from my martial art as well, because we have to dig in and start with knowing ourselves. I introduced this tool last week to my group. Is actually proving to be a very useful tool, which is basically it's like a bullseye, 3 concentric circles of a small, a middle, and an outer circle. And it's the idea of self, community, world, but it's also the 3 worlds of the artist: the inner world, the shared world, which is community, and the outer world. And I've been using these for one, just to also teach how you use in your own branding, how you can use the AI tools to move information from your inner world to the shared world to the outer world. But it's also this thing to realize, like, you have to know your inner world as an artist. You have to dig in and know who you are, right? You have to figure out who that is. That means you have to dive deep and go to these intense places before you can realize, what am I going to put out and share with people? And then what am I going to put out to the outer world, right? And so that's something that I've been digging into more and more, because I also discovered when I looked at that concentric circle, I mean, I think our colleague Simon Jones from the group, he was there and he was like, oh my God, this is even like manufacturing. Like it worked for all these different ways. It's a tool that you can use for multiple things. But I realized when I created structure, it was a conference, and I started at the community level, right? I built it at the community level, and then we did a podcast and we did all this stuff that was putting it out into the world in the outer level. And somewhere in there, I couldn't keep running it. It was draining me. It was taking my energy, my resources, and I wasn't feeling fulfilled. People that would go to my conference didn't even know I was a designer, let alone design categories for the largest companies and make billions of dollars for these companies. They didn't even know I had done that. And it made me realize when I was working with this to set it up for the team and explain it, I said, I realized I didn't start from my center. I was missing my center. I started with the community and I put it out into the world, and I wasn't feeding me. And it wasn't coming from my center. And so when I shut it down and went internal during COVID, and all this work that you guys have been seeing me do for the last 5 years of trying this, trying that, playing with this, bringing music back in, that was the stuff that was anchoring me to my center. And music was a huge piece of me coming back to my center. And I think that wall that I had up would have kept me from fully experiencing my own center. So I've been writing a lot more about how you have to come from that place. Because in martial arts, the same thing. You have to move from your center or you get off balance. You get thrown and pulled off balance in life all the time, right? But you have to come back to that center. To come back to that center, you have to know what it is. And so when you ask people, who are you? What do you love? What do you want to do? What are you all about? You're not going to know that when you're in your 20s. You're going to still not really, maybe you'll be more in your 30s. You start to really hit at your 40s, 50s, and later on, it gets more and more galvanized, right? As you have life experience and get to know your whole life story. But that center is where our brand needs to come from. Our own feeling of who we are and everything we create needs to come from that. Right. So then the last thing I wanted to say with that is that middle tier also, when I was thinking about the music, and that middle tier can also be like the center is where the artist is, where the artist lives, right? And they're the creator. That's where everything gets created from. That community, that shared tier in that middle is the gatekeeper, right? It's the Spotify, the agents, the brands, everything you have to work through to get your art out to the outer world, to everybody else. And what I started to see with AI and the fear of AI was that AI, for a lot of those gatekeepers, the merchants and everybody who run the business, they start to think, oh, I can squeeze the artists out. They're too difficult. They're too expensive, right? We can create our own music. We can just, follow this formula and create our own art and our own designs and squeeze the artist out. And that's what the fear has been from the artist, is being afraid of being obsolete and squeezed out. We've already been squeezed financially. So I offered another alternative, which is, well, actually the artist can use AI to squeeze out the middleman, because we can create our own tools to reach our audience now. Right? You don't need the middleman to reach your audience. We still have a hard time with the social media platforms because the algorithms are the gatekeeper. Mm-hmm. But that's what I want to offer up to creatives with the use of AI. Use that tool to create something new. You don't like what's happening? Find a way to do something different. And that's how artists always stay ahead. So we can't shrink back.
And that's that trust too, and the understanding that the AI tool is only going to give you back what's on the internet or what you give to it. And that's not going to create anything original. So it's trusting too in the long game, that middleman layer, trying to use that to squeeze out an artist is never going to work. And the one that will is the artist using that from the outside in, which is so interesting. And it also is making me think that I love this framework because too, that makes it so someone operating in the world from that centered place is the one that can have the psychological perspective to be resilient, to be really scrappy with AI, because they are not defined by that community level, which would be, I am a designer at North Face. Like they're designed by, I am a creative who designs, and let's just figure out how the hell I'm going to make money doing that, I guess.
Absolutely.
And so that's that. It helps you not be buffeted by these different people trying to make you obsolete. It makes it a little bit tougher skin where you're like, I just need to find a way.
Yep.
And that's how you can do that.
Oh my God, I love that.
Yeah. And employers will have to think about that too, that your resume really can't define you anymore. Just because you've worked at brand A, B, C, and D doesn't make you better at this, that you have to actually start looking at the actual people and what they can bring. And more people are starting to talk about that. The recruiting thing has really broken down. And so fresh new recruiters are talking about that. Yeah.
I feel very passionately about this. You as a person, you have your own brand and you have to build that up because you are the ones who have to market that to people in a really unique way. And
yes. Yeah. And I want to add to that because there's something I've written about as well that I love to keep sharing is the designer Debbie Millman, who has the Design Matters podcast. She's quite well known in the design world. And she had a podcast recently that I loved. And somebody was talking about that personal branding. And she was saying, I really don't like that term personal brand. She said, because I'm a branding person. And when I work with people who do branding, it's usually about what you take out, what you leave out so that you have a really honed in message. She goes, but I think as people, we need to show our whole selves. We need to not leave pieces out. And that was key to me because I think for so much of my life, I had tried to position myself with pulling things out and shutting doors, right? Leaving out music, leaving out my martial arts. I have colleagues like, why are you putting music into this? Okay, well, they got that. Well, now they're like, why is this all about martial arts and stuff like that? And realizing like, oh, I haven't been sharing this. They don't know. And there's some beauty in there. And each one of us has all of these beautiful facets. This is why this kind of work to me is really important. I love doing podcasts and conversations with people because everyone has an amazing story. They have so many facets that don't come out until people feel safe enough to share them. And so that's what I'm dedicated to, is creating safe spaces for people to share, because you hear somebody's story and, oh my God, it affects other people in such positive ways.
Yeah.
It's really important work. And, what you two are doing here is the same thing. It's really, really important work. And we don't always know that or see that. And I've had a lot of people say that to me, like, what you're doing is really important. And I have to come back and be like, great, help me monetize it.
Yeah, right.
So I always put that out there, like, we all need to make money. We all need to be paid well for what we do. We all need it. And to ask for that and to say that is not a bad thing. Money is an energy, just like any of these things. And it's, you either shun it or you're doing psychology of money. It's like, that's what it's all about. So I put money at the top of the conversation, especially for women, because we need a little bit of that push. But I'm also love transparency about how people are doing things, what people are making. I'm all for it.
One of the things that I really love about this whole conversation is your story is so unique from any other story that I think all the stories that we have are really unique. But I love the perspective of showcasing, like, you don't have to have it figured out when you're 22.
Oh my God.
I feel like our brains are trained and society trains us to think, okay, you got to have it figured out, blah, 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 but you don't, right? And you hear all these stories of really successful people who, right, they start in their 30s or they start in their 40s and everything. And I think your story is so cool in that way, but you've also gone in a circle in a sense. And like hearing it from the start to where you are now, you haven't really altered all that much from who you are as your core. You had to kind of venture out and journey, and here you are. And I think it's just really beautiful. And I thank you for being vulnerable and sharing that and showing other people that you can do it too. Doesn't matter who you are, like where you are, what you do, just kind of demystifying that fear and embracing the unknown.
Yeah, I think so. And I think for younger people, there's so much pressure. Like the world is definitely much more pressure to do well. Right now, we're in a place where that's kind of blowing up. Everything's being reinvented right now because we've just gotten to such a point where it's ridiculous what's being expected of everyone and with very little. And I do think there's something very precious about growing up the way that we did, where we had to be really scrappy. We had to get dirty. We had to go through a lot of shit. Not everybody made it. You know, you look at the music industry and a lot of my age group, people who were close to friends of mine who are long gone to drugs and, suicide and all kinds of things. It's very hard. But at the same time, you got to get dirty. You got to get dirt on you. You have to try things. You got to fall down. And I think that martial arts really taught me that too. It's like, it is about how you get back up, because you're going to take hits and you're going to be proud of those hits that you take when you get through them. But nobody has to have anything figured out. I didn't do anything on any normal timeline, whether it be getting married or you get married, you get divorced, you have a kid. I was 41 when I had a kid. My ex-husband and I had been together for 16 years before we had a kid. And it's like, everything's kind of happening backwards for me, And I love that. And I love hearing other people's stories and going, don't go by any prescribed path, because you'll be disappointed because you won't be on it. It's not going
to be yours.
Exactly.
And you're not going to stay on it anyway. So you might as well just go down a path and have it be your own. Yeah.
The other thing that I want to say is what I also loved is the conversation about the generations, right? How growing up in Gen X has shaped you and pushed you forward in this path, because you have a very unique and different and very specific experience to the way you grew up versus the way that Steph and I as millennials and how we grew up and what we surrounded ourselves with, and then seeing how that's transitioning into Gen Z and how they grew up in a very, very different generation. They're very stark differences.
Yeah.
And I think that conversation is so fascinating to me, right?
Yeah. And I think it's really worth having, because a lot of people like to say, oh, when I was your age, I was like, they try to kind of put you into this place that they think they know you because you're at a certain age, but you are not. You guys are having a really different experience at your age than any of us had. And it's super valuable. And as a design leader, I always look to my younger team to bring things that I couldn't bring. You guys have a perspective I can't see, and I want to know yours. And I'm seeing that from the younger generations who are like, I want to know yours. Like, just wanting to know people and respect that piece, and that we all have a perspective that's valuable and is needed. That's why we're going through this. So yeah, I'm dedicated to opening up about all of this and really just pushing it wide open, because Gen X hasn't had that avenue and has a harder time doing it. And so I think I'm stepping into that role of really trying to push my generation to share your stories, because they're not documented in the same way. They're hidden away. And right now the world needs them, and we need all the pieces. So now that I think about me shutting the door on music for so long, I think there's a piece of Gen X that people need right now too, that's probably been shut up a bit within a lot of my generation. So thank you for letting me share it and talk about it. I really appreciate it. And I appreciate you too. Yes. I mean, I could gush about it all day long. So you guys are doing great.
Right back.
You guys are awesome.
This is the community that we love, right? We're so, so lucky to have this world.
And I want to say, just for me, having shut the door on music and then reopening it, and what came flooding in, my partner, who's a musician, meeting Karen and all the group and coming to NAMM and knowing all these amazing people and having my son grow up now with his father doing music, and everybody has music in their life, and it has made everybody's lives so much richer. And I've just felt so welcomed, just completely welcomed. And when I say that is what forms a community, when we first rented a space here in a music place, we walked in and there was all this writing on the wall and we needed to paint it. But one of the things it said in magic marker was music is magic. Somebody had just written that on there. And I was like, yeah, music is magic.
Amazing. I love that. Well, thank you so much, Michelle. I could listen to you all day.
Yeah.
I could talk to you guys all day. And I would ask you
just like
questions.
sitting here and I was like, oh, this is just so nice. And I could just listen to this all day.
It's so good. These are the kind of conversations too that are so gets everything like the obsessive and this.
Yeah. And I love going back and listening to them. Like I've listened to our conversation, Steph, when you and I talked too. And I'm just like, oh my God, I need to find ways to pull out all these gold nuggets. There's so much great stuff in every one of these conversations. So recording it is also it's a great thing.
And how much changes over time, right? Like my life looks completely different to that.
Different.
And that
I remember listening to that episode too.
I need to listen back to that because that's going to be such a slice of
But I get chills on what you're doing
precipice.
now, and I'm just like, yeah, because I could have also been like, oh my God, she's going into this world that now AI has kind of taken over, right? But you already, and now you're doing something that will never be taken over by that. It's needed.
But that's the trust, right? Like absolutely confidently. No, I think when it comes from the internal, I know my role is very deep and human and it will keep evolving, but it's one of the oldest things that we do for each other. And so absolutely, great. That's however money comes from that is different. But I know now how to interact with the world authentically. And it's everything you were saying too, Nat, talking about Michelle and your journey too. I think I was told early, don't try to do too much because I was trying to try everything because I didn't know what I wanted to do. And it just crushed me. I probably talked about this on our thing of just I don't know how not to. And that's exactly what you're saying is actually what we need now is the nuance and the full humanity to separate ourselves from something that is less human.
And I'll say my musician partner who's about to turn 50, he was like, oh, now I tell people in their 20s, do everything, try everything.
Also, shout out Greg. We love Greg in this house. We love him.
It's so funny. I'm hearing Steph be like, I didn't do it. And I'm sitting here and I'm like, I literally did every hole I could find myself.
Well, I mean, same. And it was supposed to be a waste of time. We're spreading ourselves too thin, right? When it really wasn't. It was leading to something. But the prevailing wisdom was do one path.
But it's interesting too that you're saying that because as I reflect as to where I am now, I feel like I was so pigeonholed and I got to do everything because I got to level up that I feel like I didn't live my life to live my life.
Yeah.
Right. So by that community level.
Yeah. But I will say, coming from my perspective of where I'm at is we always kind of want to look at what we're doing and judge and go, oh, but I didn't do this. And that's great because you're having self-awareness. You're looking at yourself and but the older I get too, and look at the second half of my life and I go, we have a lot more time than we think. And we have a lot less time than we think. So, run after it when you're young, because also there's a book that I recommend to a lot of people called Strength to Strength, which is Arthur C. Brooks. It's really valuable for people at my age because it's about the second curve of life. But the beginning, the first curve that you guys are on is the thing about fluid intelligence. And then there's a second curve when people think they're kind of getting put out to pasture is this crystallized intelligence. When you start coming back and sharing what you know and you start really doing something different. But where you guys are at, your brain actually literally works in a way that you're moving quick and fluidly and you're picking up lots of stuff and you're soaking up all this stuff. And when you get to be my age, that starts becoming harder to do. You're like, oh my God, I'm not thinking as fast as I used to. Typing, I'm not even coming. Oh my God, thank God for ChatGPT because I can't think of all of this stuff.
Yeah. Oh my gosh.
So it's just understanding where you are on these curves too is really helpful in that we have this knowledge coming out and that what you're doing is what you should be doing. is whatever you want to
for sure.
try. But I do get upset about the older folks that are like, blah, 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 you should blah, blah, blah. Like, no, I really value the people in my life, the older people who have been just like, you're doing fine. Just, yeah.
Everything's good.
It's all good. You're perfect. And keep going. Not like you're perfect the way you are. Why do you want to keep doing that? But more like, you're doing great. Just,
it's okay.
But do enjoy it.
Yeah.
Have some joy in there. But I could talk to you guys all day.
But thank you for all the time you've given us. My goodness.
Thank
you so much.
You're welcome.
And if people want to follow your work and get involved with all this, where do they go? We'll put it in show notes and stuff too. But
best one is my Structure Substack. So on Substack, Structure Society, and that's STRUKTUR Society. So you can usually find the red dot. But that's where people should follow me, is on Substack.
Love it.
Yeah, I love them.
Thanks, Michelle.
All right, you beauties. You guys are awesome.
Grateful to know you.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Revoicing the Future. You can subscribe to the podcast on all major streaming platforms or visit our website. Be sure to follow us on social media to stay up to date on all things Women of NAMM. This episode was co-produced and edited by Natalie Morrison, Stephanie Lamond, and Julia Olsen. Together, we can help shape the future of our industry, one interval at a time. See you next time.